Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champions of Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming in these unprecedented times, presented by Codename Entertainment and TakeThis.org. Every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on twitch.tv/CNE Games, or later on your favorite podcast service, Mitra, Jordan, and Raffael Boccamazzo, aka Dr. B, talk about mental health in these unprecedented times, as well as how gaming affects us. If you're here with us live in the chat, you can leave a question that I, Treavor Bettis, might ask them later in the show. Our topic today is gonna be a heavy one. I'm not gonna sugarcoat that. We're gonna be talking about 1 year in the pandemic, because it's been a year, folks. But before we get to that, Mitra, Dr. B, who are you in case people don't know?
Sure. I'm a registered clinical counselor, aka counselor therapist, who works out of Victoria, British Columbia. I work with individuals, couples, families. I'll work with most anyone. I have a research specialization in the area of culture and culture shock, kind of talking about adjusting to new cultures, that kind of thing. So, yeah, that would be me.
And I am Dr. B, for long Italian name reasons that you all can see. And I am the clinical director over at Take This, and we do a lot of wonderful things with the gaming community in terms of mental health education, workshops, and when conventions were a thing, our very beloved AFK room program.
Starting off with that.
I'm gonna have some feelings about this one.
Yeah, this is kind of brought up some stuff for me too.
Before we get to that, I do want to make a quick announcement. This is the penultimate episode of season 1. And yes, I said season 1. We will be coming back with a season 2. So next week will be our last episode of the season, and then we're going to take a little bit of a break and come back on April 13th with more Champions of Psychology and more mental health talk that we hope you all enjoy. Yeah. And now that we got that happy stuff out of the way, so yeah, it has been a year. For me specifically, March 9th was the last day I was at my retail job until my anxiety and fear got to me to the point that I couldn't go anymore. I was talking to Dylan yesterday. Today is possibly the 1 year mark of when Codename started work from home. So. Yeah, this is a very, very weird time. We have a list of things to go through, but I thought it'd be interesting to start with, when was the last time before the pandemic that you went out?
You mean to do more than grocery shops?
Yeah.
Sorry,
when's the last time that you went to do something that you can't do now?
Yeah. Dr. B, you had things you were starting.
I honestly, I feel like I'm going to bring down the room. I mean, this is not an easy topic. I mean, I know that we're usually kind of lighthearted about a lot of things, and I have more than a gallows sense of humor a lot of the time. But I lost 5 people last year, and the very last thing that I did as a group activity was go to a wake before lockdown happened. And it's weird to think that the very last group interaction, now admittedly this was a fairly uplifting experience because it was thrown by the person who we unfortunately lost 2 weeks later. She wanted to be present for her own celebration, which was lovely. At the same time, that was the last thing I got to do with people.
Man,
that was over a year ago.
Yeah.
And in the process of losing 4 other people last year, I didn't get to say goodbye to any of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I'm sure a lot of people have similar stories that I've heard stuff like that, but man, that's as that being the last thing before, like, and with the coming up, that's just, I got no words.
Well, I mean, but the thing is, and this is why I think our usual irreverent attitude is probably not going to be present here today. My story isn't isolated.
Yeah.
We all know people in similar
Yeah.
circumstances who were not able to say goodbye to loved ones.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's heartbreaking.
It really is. And it's so difficult to process because then we're experiencing our own isolation as well. And so there's that emblematic of all of this is the commonality of our experiences through a pandemic, but also the isolation of those specific experiences that are heartbreaking and that we can't get the support we would usually get. We can't come together. There isn't the same closure. Yeah.
Yeah. Mitra, what about you? What was the last thing that you can remember that you went out and did that you can't do now?
Well, I think one of the last things I did that was something I haven't been able to do since was go to Vancouver with one of my kids and a couple of their friends and go to a restaurant and just have a really good time out and about.
Yeah.
And Eric and I, we take these weekend trips sometimes, and being able to see friends, I think. I'm trying to think of specifics, but I live with, 3 kids and there's 2 adults. And when I say kids, I mean kind of 20, 18, and 16-year-olds. And so the house was always full of their friends. And, there were always these impromptu get-togethers and pizza at the last minute or a big pot of chili or whatever. There was always this sense of people coming and going. We hosted several D&D games. So it's that feeling of just kind of holding the space, but also having my friends drop by. So that was happening in February for sure.
Yeah.
And then it all kind of shut down in March because I went into quarantine with 2 of my kids who had just come back from Japan, literally right before the gates clanged shut.
Jeez.
So, yeah.
Yeah, the last thing that I can remember before, because I'm not counting the retail job. I had to be there. That was not my choice. Was going to going to a bar that my friends and I always went to every Thursday night. That was where we would go. That's where we would hang out. And in that one, like, I have all these memories of times at that bar, but that one feels so weird because I could feel this overwhelming sense from everyone in the bar that we knew bad stuff was coming. And everyone was like trying to make those gallows humors jokes. It's like, oh, don't want to do that. You don't want to get corona. And, because that's when we were calling it corona and stuff. And I was so freaked out because I'd been freaked out about COVID since like December when it first started hitting Twitter and people were like, oh, calm down. It's fine and everything. So that's going to be great for my anxiety after this. Cause it's like, haha, you were right. But like, I didn't want to hug my friends. I was that scared. There's one friend that I did hug because I was like, I don't care. I'm hugging you because I'm pretty sure this is the last time I'm going to see you for a while. But like, I didn't hug. I always hug my friends. I'm a hugger. And that memory is just so weird to think about now, compared to the other ones.
Oh, well, I was going to say we had a similar feeling at least I and mutual friends of some of ours who had a similar feeling at PAX East last year.
Mm.
You know,
Oh
prior
yeah,
to-
that was the last one.
that was the last convention.
Yeah.
And I, you know, in a lot of respects, it kind of deserves the capital letters that it sounds like. And you know, at the time, people were debating, you know, how bad is this going to be? How bad is, you know, how, you know, what do we need to do to take care of things? And I did a panel at East with someone I know who is an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins, and I asked her, how bad is this going to be? Just, you know, under our breaths. And her response, oh, so bad. So bad that, you know, as much as, and so there was this overhanging shadow. Was GDC, Game Developers Conference, going to get canceled? It was.
Yep.
What's going to happen to the rest of the events that many of us make a living going to?
Yeah.
There was so much uncertainty and this fear of upheaval that was just present with us, even as we're trying to celebrate seeing each other, maybe for, you know, maybe for the last time for quite a while. And it turns out it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I guess the very last things I did would have been to see my clients in person. And that was a difficult transition in some ways, particularly for some of my clients. I was very fortunate that many of them were able to continue working remotely via Zoom or Doxy or any of the various things we all had tried to kind of work out how to work online, because I had done some work online with clients. I may have had one or two clients that I hadn't actually met in person, but in general, I was in person. I work as a somatic therapist, so I'm really kind of paying attention to body language and kind of help clients ground in their bodies and all that kind of stuff that, you know, had to figure out how to do that. But so when I was kind of had that week, I was then going into March break. And because my kids were coming back from Japan, I was going into quarantine with them, with the 3 quarantinagers, because we had my 2 and then a borrowed kid who couldn't go home because of a younger sibling. And we had, you know, Eric, my husband, decamped for the 2 weeks so that he could work on figuring out how people were going to work from home at Codename. And my other son went to stay with friends. And there was still this idea that it wasn't necessarily going to come to the island, that, you know, we were going to take all the precautions like people should, but that we were probably going to be okay. So again, you had that variation in how bad is it?
Yeah.
Oh, so bad, in terms of people who knew. And, oh, maybe this really is just the flu. Maybe this isn't a big deal. Just a few weeks, you know, just a few months, you know, we can get back to normal, you know, the summer, but oh, then the second wave. So there was this process. But when I went into quarantine, everyone else was just kind of still doing their thing.
Yeah.
You know, they were wearing masks, you know, occasionally, but there was a lot of confusion around masks. And this was the thing I think we all experienced that made it quite difficult too, don't you think? Which
Yeah.
is that there wasn't, understandably, I think epidemiologists were figuring out what was happening and what we needed to do. But there was a lot of confusion around wear a mask, don't wear a mask, how distance is good distance, you know, what do I do when I go to the grocery store? How far away do I stand? Which way do I walk? You know, all of these are weighty things to process from a cultural perspective.
Yeah. The first thing that we had on our list to talk about, and I think is very relevant to everything that was just said, was trauma. Like, you know, I don't think we've really covered much trauma on the show yet, but like, this is a shared trauma that everyone has. Like, that is one thing that is going to connect everyone, which is kind of the weird thing that it's also divided so many people, is like, all of us are going through this. All of us share this trauma now. Where do you want to start with that?
I want to kind of describe trauma a little bit, because I think we're very quick to associate it with, you know, really sort of immediately challenging events. We think about trauma in terms of war. We think about it in terms of, being attacked on the street, or, getting run over, or,
Mm-hmm.
major things like that, or drowning almost, or, but there's a range in terms of how we experience, how we deal with experiences. What's traumatic for me may not be quite as traumatic for you.
Mm-hmm.
What's traumatic might be more traumatic for someone because I can't see a loved one, or I've lost lots of people this year, or I didn't get to say goodbye, or I've had to put off a surgery,
Mm-hmm.
right? And depending on what's happening for the person, that's more or less traumatic. And it's really not okay for another person to say, well, my experience is more traumatic than yours. And
Yeah.
that's it. That keeps
Yeah.
coming up. And there is no pain Olympics.
No.
There is no podium,
No.
you know?
Well, and a metaphor I like to use when it when it comes to something like that is, just because you broke your leg and I broke my finger doesn't mean my finger's less broken.
Yeah. Yeah. I will never ever understand well, you think you gotta, like, that's just in general.
Who
I mean,
wins in that?
I know. I'm just like, I understand you need to one up, but like, that's a weird thing to one up right there.
Yeah, I think what happens for people is there is this idea that there's just not enough validation for painful experiences.
Yeah.
And therefore, I don't know, but I'm working hard to get my validation. And if that means I'm telling you that my thing is a bigger deal than your thing, but nobody wins
Yeah.
in those situations at all. And you may only have broken your finger, but what if you're a pianist? What if you're a guitarist? Like, come on, So we have to look at the context around a person's experiences to understand how and why people might be experiencing pain. But really, the central issue here is isolation makes any traumatic experience worse.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't have a way to process this, if I don't have enough support around me, if I don't have the care and validation and understanding and affirmation that I need, I am going to feel worse.
Well,
So.
can I jump in and comment on something there, Mitra? As part of what we do at Take This, because we do a lot of educational stuff. In fact, that's all I do these days. I haven't seen clients in years. There was a journal article I came across about a year ago now.
Yeah.
Not coincidentally.
Mm-hmm.
Where they made an interesting differentiation between isolation and loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
Where the differentiation they made was that isolation is a purely numbers game.
Mm-hmm.
That a person can be relatively isolated from a social network while still having extremely fulfilling, connected social experience. Whereas loneliness is the perception that there's something broken in your social network. And that is irrespective of numbers. And that was a differentiation I've really tried to bear in mind in the course of the last year. Because yes, while many of us have been physically isolated, a lot of us still managed to feel relatively connected to people and not necessarily lonely through isolation. And what you're speaking to in terms of social connectedness, in terms of healing through traumatic experiences, that is one of the most consistent things across trauma literature.
Yes, indeed.
That a sense of social connectivity, both in terms of pre-trauma experience, concurrent with the trauma experience, and post-trauma experience, that is one of the most protective factors. And for a lot of us, that has been ripped away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to speak to loneliness a little bit more as well, you can be in a family system or in a marriage or regularly around people. Because some people, of course, are having to work through this and are going into work and don't, healthcare workers or essential workers. And you can still be feeling very lonely, and you can still feel invalidated in your experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. and we may still not be able to reach those resources that would help us through that time. In fact, that's one of the challenges, is that some resources which would have been there for people aren't available. For example, although individual therapy can be costly and difficult, group therapy was often a good option for people. And certainly for a while, once the pandemic started, group therapy was much more difficult to set up for people. Now, of course, we can do group therapy via Zoom and other means. It's not the same, but it's still a possibility.
So the term on here that Dr. B even used early on Twitter is the grief anniversary.
Yeah.
And that's very, I feel, aptly named. It feels that way, absolutely. And there was a list of things on here of anger, losses, helplessness, and denial. What are those? I mean, some of those we understand why they're there with grief anniversary, but like overall, what was it that you wanted to talk about with them?
Well, I mean, let's just talk loss. I mean, I don't think anybody watching this, anybody listening to this, even the three of us talking about this, have any shortage of things we can talk about that we've lost in the course of the last year, whether it's touch, whether it's, sharing food with people we love, whether it's expectations, routine, whether it's, God, those last two ones are so huge. The expectations and routine, the loss of those. I'm that probably hit me harder than anything else I can think of, because, when we as people, and there's, again, no shortage of evidence for this, that routines are good for us. Routines are real good for us to, at least a little bit. And they help give us a sense of predictability and future orientation. And when a lot of us, when we lose those routines, we lose that ability to look towards the future, and we end up losing hope.
Yeah,
absolutely. Because really, if we think about it, our existence or our comfort in organizing our existence, what works is we need a sense of security in being able to plan. And then we need the capacity within us to cope with change. And when you have both those things, you've got a fair amount of resilience in your life. You've got the ability, you kind of have that ability to create goals without the hopelessness of thinking goals can't or won't happen. And you have the ability to kind of do your daily life and be in the moment. And they're kind of in contrast, the future goals and the actually being in the moment thing. But, we need them both. And routines are part of that. Routines are part of a sort of affirming that there's hope. There's this thing we're going to do. I'll see you next Sunday, that kind of thing. And so those are really important in terms of the building blocks towards how our life goes. And the expectation of being able to have the company and care of others. Yeah, it's really hard to have lost that. I personally was in a state of grieving. I have older family members. My mother is in England. I was terrified about what was going to happen for her because the UK was really blowing up at one point.
yeah.
I have an aunt and uncle in Ontario. Ontario's going through so much. And I miss people. I'm lucky that they're still here. But in my life, I've had the experience of people dying at a distance and not being able to say goodbye. That's what happens when you move continents as a child, multiple times. And so I get that. It's very painful.
One of the things that Dr. B was saying was with the expectations of losing that and becoming hopeless. Like, I don't know about you, but like there was so many times throughout last year that I heard, "Oh, it'll get better in August. Oh,
Yeah.
it'll get better in November," or something like that, and like trying to hold on to that and like I genuinely think what got me through those first few months is August. I can get to August. And just continuously pushing that back. I'm at the point now, though, like there's been a lot of videos and memes going around where it's just like, me in March 2020, straight panic. Me in March 2021 is just him in a bathrobe with a drink dancing to some lights. And it's like, I kind of get that because, like,
Yeah.
I no longer have an expectation, and it's almost like you were saying, ripped away to the point where I'm just like, I'm numb to it. Like I don't have an expectation of when I'm going to get the vaccine. And by the way, I've been seeing people in chat posting that they've got appointments or they got their first shot or whatnot. I'm so happy about that. Legitimately, every time I hear that, it heals me. It heals my soul a little bit. But like, I don't know when I'm going to get it. I don't know how my city's going to be able to handle it and everything with that. And so I've kind of had to let go of that expectation of that hope and be okay with not having hope for that. Just having it'll happen eventually.
Yeah. I went through a period of real despair starting last summer because one of my kids was going to go through surgery and I did not want to do anything to compromise that surgical date at all, which meant that instead of actually being able to open up a little and see people, I couldn't. And by the time I could, it was October. And then by the time November came, we were shutting everything down again. So yeah, I feel that numbness. I really get that. Somebody in the chat was saying was quoting the Princess Bride, but I just sucked the last a year of your life away. Tell me, how do you feel? It's like, yeah. That is exactly it. And I'm hearing people talk about, or seeing people talk about, the loss of a year in their child's life for specific developmental things, like being able to play with friends, or being able to have those experiences that you want from them, for them. And for my kids, this is very true. My eldest had just started university. By the end, of course, of his last term, which was, I guess April-ish, he'd had to do the last month and a half online, and he just knew there was no way. So he had to take this year off. And things were really starting to go right. He did a trip to Montreal. He was starting to meet new people. He was having a great time. My other kid had an online graduation ceremony. And so all that, I'm lucky. They're fine. They're healthy.
Yeah.
But their lives have been stopped. There is a place here to actually talk about some of the benefits that I've seen come from that in our family. But let's just not get there too early because there's lots here.
Well, there's a lot of anger.
Yeah.
And this is there's a lot of injustice that many of us either are sort of nebulously experiencing, or we're having a hard time articulating, because there's I'm gonna, this is my gallows humor coming out again. There's an online meme I've seen many times where it's just a picture of a casket, and somebody says, "When I die, I want my casket to be carried by all the people in college I had a group project with, so they can let me down one last time." and there are so many of us who have been doing everything we can, because we know that, it's frustrating when a new situation comes out and we have a lack of scientific consensus and data is emerging and the situation is changing and in flux. There is a lot of frustration with that. And that confusion and that anger at that confusion is understandable. But as more scientific data has come out, and we have started to understand, one, how effective good masking techniques are, not necessarily for yourself, but to protect others. And that wearing a mask is a selfless act. And of course, there are people with legitimate physical constraints who can't wear these things. At the same time, there are no shortage of people making demonstrations flaunting their not wearing masks. And for those of us who have lived our lives sequestered, isolated, and are suffering through it for the benefit of others, to see others flaunt whatever they can, just flaunt these decisions, is so infuriating.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So infuriating that we are spending so much time protecting you for you to turn around and slap us in the face.
Yeah. There was a video that went pretty viral at some point, and that was the other weird thing, how many videos went viral for like a day and then vanished because everyone was just stuck at home and on to the next thing. That it was kind of a weird thing how fast culture, like internet culture, sped through last year. But there was one video of a woman who was told to wear a mask, and she was taking the video. She was told to wear a mask. She put it on, and she described how she was freaking out. She started crying because she didn't want to wear it, and was, screaming at the people that she didn't want to wear it and everything. And a lot of people were like saying like, oh, this woman's, just a whiner. And like, I watched the video 3 times, and I turned to my wife and went, she described an anxiety attack. Like, a lot of the people that I saw that, well, not a lot of them because they got worse, but like some of the people that were like very much like, I don't want to wear a mask. I'm like, is it because it makes it more real? Is it because that like when you put that mask on, you have to accept the fact that we are in a pandemic, that this is happening, that you need to protect yourself and others? And that's kind of how I saw it. Like, I don't even, they're still completely wrong. I will scream at anyone not wearing a mask. But it was like, I understand what that thought process was for that person, because they were experiencing a panic attack, possibly for the first time in their life.
And those are terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Those are
terrifying.
I'm going to add that, there are some people who have maybe experienced assault and had their mouth covered.
Oh, yeah, no.
And have trauma experiences around that. And I can really appreciate them not being able, literally not being able to wear a mask. Now, over here in BC, at least, you can get a doctor's note saying, if there's a good reason you can't wear a mask, you need to carry it with you at all times, the doctor's note, I mean. And if you can ever manage to wear one for a short while, that's great. But I do think we need to have some understanding and compassion for people in that situation.
Oh, yeah.
And I see that as very different, of course. Because the rest of the time, honestly, you stop at red lights, right? You do the courteous thing in other circumstances in your life that keep us safe. How is this any different? Is this a lot different than wearing a seatbelt? Is this, and of course that's protecting yourself as well, but perhaps not putting other people in the car with you at risk. But this is a simple and small act. And I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't think anyone needs to agree with me about what I think you should or shouldn't do. But I think if we're being asked to do something that is so simple, that is not stressful for most people.
Yeah. That's the big thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Mine is cute. It's got rainbows and unicorns on it. I just want to say, come on.
Is that Yankat?
No. Oh, that's actually a unicorn.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, it's cute. I love it.
There we go. Yeah.
This episode has been very much like, this sucks. This is absolutely terrible. But some of the things that have come out of it, like, I love being on a Zoom call with my friends and being like, oh, look at the mask that I got, or like, and showing off stuff like that, and like finding something good about this thing that we now have to do to keep ourselves and everyone else safe. Yeah. And so like there's little things like that have been nice, that has been a way of people latching on to something good out of this bad situation, that is, it's still talking about it, it's still present, it's still there in your head, but you're able to have a nice conversation with your friends about it, granted through Zoom.
Yeah, one of the things that I felt such loss around my middle child's grad ceremony. I wanted to be there. I wanted to hug all the kids. I just really, I'd had such a good time with my eldest child's ceremony, and I was really looking forward to more of the same, of course. one of the things that came of it that was really actually quite fabulous was we don't have a lot of family nearby. Actually, everyone in my family is quite far away, and in my husband's family as well. There's very few people local. But because it was live on YouTube, it was being streamed, we could all watch it. My folks in England, my folks in Ontario, my cousins, they could all watch it and they could comment and we could chat together about what was happening. Hey, that was a great speech. Oh my God, look at what that kid accomplished. Isn't that cool? You know, and just be silly together as well over it. And that was something that would never have happened before.
Yeah.
So there was something really quite beautiful about that. I think it's being able to take those beautiful experiences, or just kind of being able to turn it around. But the challenge there is that it takes energy to do so.
Yeah.
When you're grieving the loss of something that you really loved about your life, or you're grieving the way you were able to be, the way you could do yourself socially, as it were. And that's a tremendous loss. And how do we move from that state of loss, grief, and burnout into, okay, but here's some great stuff that we've, you know, it's actually a pretty massive gulf, you know, so.
Yeah, that, I mean, again, if the chat hasn't figured out by now, I love metaphors. I love analogies. I love metaphors. And I often think about the grief process as you're going to volunteer with Habitat for Humanity. Okay, follow me. This is a little bit of a long one, so follow with me for a second.
All right, I put on my walking shoes.
All right,
thank you. You know, the grief process is like going to volunteer for Habitat for Humanity, and you're working to build a house, and you're given some tools. Now, maybe they're not the best, most expensive tools in the world because, you know, they're a nonprofit, and you're struggling sometimes because you got to share tools with other people. It's not an ideal situation. Now, for some people, the grieving process is like continuing to go to, you know, the manager on site and say, hey, these aren't the right tools. These aren't the right tools. These aren't the right tools. And essentially arguing with the situation. And there comes, and you start to process the fact that eventually this is what you have to work with. What do I do with it? And seeing people come to, okay, this is what we have. This is what we have in front of us. What do we do with it? There have been some really amazing moments of joy and celebration, and essentially a new normal that has come out of it. I mean, a really funny one that happened just a couple of nights ago. I was doing a Zoom call with some friends, and this group of friends has a collection. They essentially take snapshots of other people's backgrounds. So they can be like, oh, hey, I'm in so-and-so's room now. And they put their Zoom background on. They didn't have mine. So they asked me to move out of the way so they could get my background. And I was, of course, playing with this. There was me down at the bottom of the screen, just like Kilroy looking out. And we ended up having fun with this because this is our new normal. Yep. And it got to the point that some people started bragging in a private chat we all have that, oh, I have the hat hoard now.
I love it.
There is this tension between what we want, what we expect, and what we have.
Yeah.
And I see the grieving process as coming to terms with what we have in a very honest and accepting way.
Let's go ahead and take a quick break to remind listeners and viewers of our disclaimer, and then we'll have a bit more conversation about this. Be right back.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
And we're back. Earlier on in the episode, we talked about expectations, and there is a big chunk of the document that is about expectations, pandemic productivity. And I know that we touched on this in our first episode. Our first episode was pandemic fatigue. And we did cover a lot of stuff in that episode about, this sort of thing, but this one felt so different. It hit different, where it was like, it's been a year. And I know that, like, at the beginning, there was zero productivity from me. Absolutely zip. And as time went on, I started to get some, but that old feeling set in, the quote unquote, the millennial guilt, where I was like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not getting enough done. Where I was still at the beginning of the pandemic, I was getting 3 podcasts out a week and was editing them, was getting guests, was recording them, was doing everything like that, doing the social media and everything. And I still sat there and went, I'm not doing enough. And that's because I think I wasn't going to my retail job. And that was the thing, is like, no, that is the job. You are just having fun. And that's changed now in the year. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I think we wanted to do this episode, to talk about the differences between the beginning of it and now. And like, now this is what I do. It turns out that those things that I was doing that I felt like I wasn't being very productive on at the beginning of the pandemic is what I do now. So it's weird how the pandemic productivity has changed so much. And I don't know if people are still having that, where they're having the, like, I'm not doing enough. And it's still during the pandemic. Dark B is nodding their head. Yeah.
Yeah. So absolutely. One of
Yeah.
the things that Take This does with some frequency is mental health trainings and consultations. And since there's no more conventions, we've been doing a lot more of them in the last year. And when we first started out doing these trainings, now that people who had never worked remotely are now, working remotely, there was this perception of, okay, we're working from home.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, the thing we would remind people is, no, you're not working from home. You're attempting to work amidst a global pandemic while renegotiating your parenting duties. Yeah. And there was often a moment of,
Mm-hmm.
And lately, as we've done this, the tone of things has changed. And now it's, well, have you changed your productivity expectations, workplaces? Because now people are dealing with the stress of having done that for an entire year. Working from home is a different skill set than working at an office.
Definitely.
Well, there's one that I wanted to point out that Garwar just put into the chat, and I've seen a lot recently, is that a lot of people are trying to stress, like, you're no longer trying to learn how to work from home. You're trying to learn how to live at work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's something we talk about with people all the time, is I actually don't like the term work-life balance, because work's a part of life. It's my pedantic autistic brain just kind of kicking in. The way I talk about it is work-home separation.
Very much so. Very much so. So I want to address a couple of things that you've both brought up. And the first one is development, trauma, and productivity. Okay, so in our life process, we continue to develop. Sometimes people think of develop as what's happening with kids, as in, they're born, they start to crawl, they start to walk, they start to talk, and these are all developmental stages, right? But these don't end when you're an adult. They just transform a little bit. We have developmental stages in our careers, and expectations of those as well. And we have developmental stages for the goals we want to achieve in our life. So, for example, if you embark on a health plan or a diet, you go through various developmental stages of becoming more and more comfortable with that, and then of reviewing your goals and is this working for you? And those are all kind of ways of talking about development. So, trauma or traumatic events interrupt the developmental process. And
Yeah.
I cannot stress this enough, because I think it's so important to recognize that whenever there's a trajectory we're going along, if you have something massive that interrupts it, you can't just pick up on the same trajectory and keep going. It doesn't work that way. If your kids are home, which our kids all were last year as we were figuring out how to do school from home, that's not the same trajectory in terms of their education. And so that's certainly not the same trajectory for you in terms of supporting them. And if you're trying to work as well while throwing in the odd load of laundry, coping with the fact that now everyone is home and eating you out of house and home, personal experience with this one, while you're trying to grocery shop less, can we just say how hard that is? And being fortunate enough to have the money for groceries is a whole other thing, because some people were dealing with either layoffs, furloughs, job losses, that kind of thing also makes it really difficult.
Yeah.
So just
Well,
bringing that into the picture around how do you then move from all of that to being productive and to have unrealistic expectations of yourself. Listen, every day you live through a pandemic and you don't get sick,
Yeah.
that's an accomplishment.
Well, not just that. Every day you've gone through a pandemic and haven't gotten someone else sick.
Yes.
You are
Yeah.
literally doing the best and max that you should be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and it's one thing that I think going forward, it's worthy of us thinking about is the context in which our current employment structure was created. A lot of our jobs and a lot of our expectations of jobs were established in this post-World War II era of, at least if you were a, straight white male, prosperity. And with the idea that you can work one job and live a middle-class lifestyle. I mean, I just read an article about The Simpsons that, when The Simpsons debuted in 1989, the idea of affording a home on a single working class job while feeding 3 kids and having a stay-at-home wife. I at the time that was considered, the middle-class lifestyle. Now I'm considered that's aspirational.
Yeah.
Like, I can't
Yeah.
imagine working a blue-collar union job in Seattle and being able to afford a home in Seattle, where I think it's estimated that in order to afford the most inexpensive home here in the city, you have to make $120,000 a year.
God.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, and can you imagine trying to feed it's ridiculous. So it's worthy of considering where our expectations of productivity and jobs structurally are coming from, and are they still applicable to a pandemic and post-pandemic world?
Yeah.
Exactly. I think we're also putting a lot of people who are doing work that we really need them to do at risk, and we're not paying them enough.
Oh,
think
yeah.
about, the essential workers, and I'm not talking about healthcare. I'm talking about people who are, they work in our grocery stores, they deliver our packages.
Yeah.
They are working really hard for a lot less money than they should be. They are kind of supporting the fabric of our society. And many of them, certainly where I live, have been asking if they can get vaccinated as
Yeah.
well. And we're in this position where there's just not enough in terms of vaccines and deployment of vaccines. And I just really feel for people who are struggling with that. I don't personally expect to be vaccinated till July.
Yeah.
And
I'm
if
in the
I'm
same
lucky,
boat.
end of
Same.
June, early July.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's if things go as they're supposed to, right? On schedule, nothing happens with shipments.
Well, the other thing is that like I've heard, here and there was just like, oh, if you do this, you could get in there. And I'm like, I don't really want to. Like, I don't want to do that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm working from here right now. I don't go out. I'm used to this now. And someone else that is much more needs that shot. And
Yeah.
I'm not about to do that. And so that's why I've taken away that expectation, because I'm okay with that because of the way that things are rolling out right now.
Well, that sort of mercenary behavior, part of the reason I've been as careful as I have is I live a couple blocks away from my mom, who has an idiopathic degenerative lung condition. She, never smoked a day in her life, and all of these things. She's on massive amounts of immunosuppressants, and the idea that she would have an opportunity for a sense of hope taken away from her from someone like me, who's relatively healthy, who can wait, is infuriating to me. Same thing with my dad, who's a 5-time cancer survivor.
Yeah.
The idea that, and this is personal for me, the idea that they would take that opportunity away from my parents is just infuriating.
Yes, I think that this is where it becomes. I think we talked about this in context with masks as well, which is that the erosion of the social contract. The agreement about how we behave in society and how we can support each other and what those expectations are. So the social contract, very simply, is, I walk into the post office, and if I were to take my pants off right then,
I was like, she's gonna cut in line.
If I grabbed a bottle of wine and a glass and said, "I'm not having this. You want some with me?" Sorry. I just just trying to find examples. But
I get what you're saying. The
Mitra parties are the best parties.
Mitra parties are the best parties. Yeah. No, I get what you're saying, because like, we talked about this in yesterday's meeting, that like, if you'd gone back in time 2 years and you'd asked me, all right, hypothetically, a global pandemic hits and the best way to resolve it is by wearing a mask, what do you think happens? I'd be like, everybody puts a mask on. And if you sat there and told me, it was like, well, no, there's going to be a huge, divide between putting it on or not, I'd be like, that sounds like the plot of a bad movie. Like, that doesn't sound realistic. And here we are. So yeah, I get what you mean by the social contract of like what everybody needs to do to have everything work well. Like, that's what, like you're saying, going into the post office, there is a line that forms there. No one is like, get in line. They're just like, everyone, even the best part is, if there's no sign, people go, is this the line? They ask that because they know that's part of the social contract.
Exactly.
But this is, it's too much to ask, apparently.
I think part of the problem is when things are new or newer, we have trouble adjusting to them. That's not an excuse, but I think it is part of what people have struggled with in the past year. It's kind of like the culture shock piece. There are cultures in which it's considered very rude to look your elders in the eye.
Yeah.
North America isn't one of them. And so if you have people who are, look me in the eye, and so
I know Dr. B laughing is great right now.
As an autistic person,
I was about to say.
I welcome
Right.
this.
right. But what I'm getting at is this idea that when you switch from one culture to another, you really might struggle about what is the thing to do. And having done this several times in my life, I can tell you one of my favorite examples is standing up in the classroom when the teacher walked in grade 4. So everybody's sitting down, teacher comes in, I stand up, because that's what I was taught to do. That's what happened every day at the school I went to before that. And so it was automatic. And the teacher looked at me like, why are you standing up? And the other students looked at me and kind of pointed and laughed. So this is one of we have our innate responses to things. And when you have an alteration in the social contract or expectations about new behavior or arrows on the floor of the grocery store and places you're supposed to stand, it takes a while for people to settle in, and the resentment and frustration rises as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that sense of anger about doing the wrong thing also comes up.
Mhm.
Whether it's I'm watching someone else stand way too close to me, and now I have to say, excuse me, I just need you to step back a little because you're not at 2 meters, 6 feet for you
Mhm.
in the US. But like,
America.
well, hey, in England too,
Yeah.
the
Oh,
UK
they use
has that
feet?
as well. Yeah, they're imperial.
What?
Well, they're
Oh,
meters, but they still also use imperial
Oh, yeah.
culturally.
They also
Oh,
use
okay.
stones, though. So,
Yeah,
anywho.
yeah. Then they still talk about it in terms of that. It's use kilos and stones. I mean, there you go. Again, the imperial system was the much older one, and then they're still adjusting all these many years later. So we've only had a year, so we can just
Yeah.
being
So this one, unsurprisingly, went a little bit longer than our other ones. And I do hope that some form of the conversation that was happening here today did something for you, or at least was just kind of a kind of a talk group of just sitting around and talking about this 1 year of a pandemic. There was one thing that I wanted to read because, well, it's from my friend Lee Goldberg, and it was one of them in here that like hit me in the heart. And it said, one of the hardest parts of this is the fact that my son, now 19 months, has never played with another child. And that
Oh,
one hit
God.
me so
Yeah.
hard in the
Oh,
heart.
God.
Yeah. So, you know, I think before we do the outro and everything is just put on a mask. Just even if you hate it, even if you don't think it works, just do it. If you can sit there and be like, I put one on, but it was just whatever. As long as you put one on, you can say all you want after this is over. I don't care. Just put on a damn mask.
It's I think part of our reasoning for saying the stuff we have is just to re-emphasize you're not alone in this. Okay. There's a lot of reasons that you're feeling the swirl of feelings that you are, whether it's anger, whether it's hopelessness, whether it's a lot of other things. You're not alone in this,
Mhm.
even if it feels lonely right now.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's very understandable, the disorientation, the anger, rage at times. We're with you. You're not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that is going to do it for today's episode. Mitra, Dr. B, where can people find you on the internet?
Right down here at Mitra Jordan on Twitter. I'm taking a leaf out of Dr. B's book down here. And also at mitrajordan.com.
Yeah.
You can find, make sure to, find all the stuff I do with Take This at Take This Org on all the socials, on Twitter and everything. But, right down here is at the Dr. B, not just the, but the. There's 2 E's. Spell out doctor like Doctor Who and all that. So at the Dr. B, and you'll get rants about autism and Dungeons and Dragons and
As it should be.
And
As it should be.
recipes and hats
Yeah.
and all sorts of
And hats, and definitely hats.
yeah, recipes about hats. I don't know.
Yeah. You can find me on the Difficulty Class podcast every Friday, and on Champions Lore every Monday here on twitch.tv/CNE Games at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, as well as on Twitter at the Treavor. There's an A hiding in there. Once again, in case you weren't here at the beginning, this is our penultimate episode of season 1. I guess it's better that this isn't the season finale, otherwise we're leaving it on a real big downer.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, we're going to be back next week with our season finale, and then we're going to be taking a small break and coming back on April 17th with more conversations about mental health and gaming and everything else that's going on, I guess.
Yeah.
So we hope you join us next week, as well as when we come back for our second season. I want to give a big shout out to Jay and Lauren for handling the chat today. I was watching, and I appreciate you both so much. And I'm glad that chat was appreciating you as well. I want to say thank you to Codename Entertainment and Take This for giving us an opportunity to have these discussions. If you missed any part of the show, you can listen to it later today as a podcast at 2 p.m. on your favorite podcast service. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, because again, we got a second season coming up, we need some ideas. Yay. So we'd love to hear from you. You can send those into champions of psychology at codenameentertainment.com. And don't worry if you have trouble spelling psychology. That's one of my favorite reasons about the show is that I now remember how to spell it. For those of us live, just a heads up, Bardic Inspiration is postponed. But there was a really cool Idle Champions Presents last night, and if you haven't checked out the other ones, you should go check those out. And all the other cool things that Codename Entertainment is doing. As well as Take This. When you haven't actually said this on the show. When is Takes This stream?
Yeah, no, because I always feel weird promoting things. I'm on somebody else's channel.
No, I get it. Do it.
Every Monday night at 3:30 p.m. Every Monday night at 3:30 p.m. Pacific, 6:30 Eastern. We've got something going on. Whether it's a panel, whether it's playing mental health games, or every Monday. Yeah. Go follow Take This org on Twitch.
A thing I've told people before, I'm like, even if your stream goes over our stream, they can have two streams up. They can multitask. But yeah, that is going to do it for this week's episode. And we hope to see you here next week. But until then, take care of yourself.
Take good care of yourself.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.